Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, July the 19th, 2024. So my last couple of videos have done quite well by my standards in terms of how many views they get. You know, I always think it's good when I can get 2,000 views on a video. And it does seem that certain topics get more views than others. Very often, if I put up a video focusing on Donald Trump, for example, I will get a fair amount of views. Or if I want to get a really serious amount of views, again, by my humble standards, then I would put up a video relating to, say, Princess Catherine. So today, I'm probably not going to get quite so many views. It's not going to be a video focusing on any specific in the news celebrity. Instead, I want to look at this point in space called Black Moon Lilith. I was about to talk about Black Moon Lilith a few videos ago, but then I had this sudden uncertainty because I started to worry, was my software actually producing the right positions for Lilith? And I sort of backtracked. I thought, hold on, I need to work it out, make absolutely sure I've got it right, because that would be embarrassing if I was using charts that didn't have the right positions. I wanted to be absolutely sure, you know, so when you've got a computer program, you should never trust its output. You should always compare it against other outputs, independent sources. So that's what I did. But you know, my program is Kepler, and it does seem that this Kepler is producing at the right positions of Lilith. And when I say Lilith, the trouble is with this point in space, Black Moon Lilith, which it's not an asteroid, it's not a planet, it's the point where the moon is furthest away from the Earth. And so on the basis of that, you can create an orbit, and there are different methods of calculating the Black Moon Lilith, and that's where the complication lies. There's the mean Black Moon Lilith, and there is the true Black Moon Lilith, and they can be a long way apart. And I suspect that most people use the mean Black Moon Lilith, but to me, intuitively, it would make sense to use the true Black Moon Lilith. So I've made a decision. I'm going to be looking at the true Black Moon Lilith, and I'm going to use the positions, you know, as put out by the Kepler software package, and that does confirm what the positions put out by other pieces of software. I think that in Astro.com's extended output, I think you have to put in something like H13 if you want to see the true Black Moon Lilith, something like, I think that's H13. And my approach to Black Moon Lilith is going to be empirical, by and large, rather than, say, rational. The sort of rational approach would be to sort of look at perhaps what other people say, what it says, what it's supposed to mean in theory. But an empirical approach is just to look at some charts. Look at charts where you would expect Black Moon Lilith to be strong. So Black Moon Lilith, of course, from a mythological point of view, is this feminine force which is often seen as being quite demonic, this thing that takes things away at night. It is to do with the night. And that was, in a way, my starting point. Perhaps it's a suggestion that at night bad things can happen. And yeah, I'm going to be looking at Black Moon Lilith in terms of a few charts where I would have expected it to be prominent. And I suppose what have prompted this search or these thoughts was looking at the horoscope of John F. Kennedy Jr. in particular, not his accident, his fatal air crash in 1999, because I think that Black Moon Lilith was really important in terms of understanding that crash. Now, my view is kind of naive in a way. I do not use Black Moon Lilith when I look at horoscopes. I can't use everything. I've never really bothered with it before. But I have noticed in the comments section that people have mentioned Black Moon Lilith, and so I thought I would look at it. And really this video is, for me, is sort of educational in a way. I mean, I don't know whether it's educational for you, but it's perhaps educational for me. It's about me trying to sort of understand what this point might be about, and it's a kind of an introduction of Black Moon Lilith to myself, and maybe in looking at this video you can get some idea of my process. And so I'm not really claiming any expertise on Black Moon Lilith. I'm sure that there are many people watching this who know more about Black Moon Lilith than me, who perhaps are using it on a regular basis in their astrology, and perhaps have been using it for years. So I'm not claiming any expertise. I'm not claiming that I know more about Black Moon Lilith than you. In fact, you probably, in many cases, you may know more about it than me. So that's how I'm coming into this video. But before I look at Black Moon Lilith, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, July the 19th, 2024. And I would ask, if you do enjoy this video, I would be very grateful if you were to press the like button. If you're not subscribed, I would be super grateful if you were to subscribe. Of course, if you like the video. Obviously, if you don't like the video, then of course you shouldn't subscribe, or you should even unsubscribe. So okay, so let's look at what's going on today. So here is the chart for today. There, top right, that is a painting of Lilith, or a painting titled Lilith. There you can see a snake nestled under her chin. And okay, so the moon, as you can see from this chart, is in the process of changing signs. And this chart set for noon New York has the moon in Capricorn, moon at 4:26 Capricorn. Now, the actual time of the sign change is at 9:14 a.m. London time. So if you are in the Americas, if you're in Europe, then it's a moon in Capricorn day. Okay, if you're in Europe and you're up early, then you get the tail end of Sagittarius, but by and large, it is all about moon in Capricorn. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then okay, it's going to be more of a moon in Sagittarius day, because moon won't change sign, I suppose, until this evening. But by and large, we can regard the moon as being in Capricorn. And the moon actually doesn't make many aspects. Just before the moon moves into Capricorn, it makes a square to Neptune. There it is. I think we will be feeling this moon square Neptune. Okay, especially if we're in Asia or Australia or New Zealand, but I think all of us at some level will be feeling moon square Neptune. And this moon square Neptune may be about a bit of uncertainty. Moon in Sagittarius is looking for variety, wants excitement, but maybe it's about jumping to the wrong conclusion, chasing the wrong things. That Neptune is a little bit dangerous. In terms of fixed stars, Neptune is still very, very close to Skeet. It's sort of permanently there. So, well, not quite permanently. It will, of course, eventually move back, retrograde away from it, but it's still on Skeet. So there is a certain sense of delusion, perhaps allowing our feelings to take us in the wrong direction. So that is possible. But then the moon moves from Sagittarius, from being square Neptune, to being in Capricorn. And I suppose every month I talk about the moon in Capricorn. The moon in Capricorn is it's in a very different place from Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a fire sign. It's perhaps about variety, excitement, intuition. Moon in Capricorn is more materialistic. It's about our material environment. It can be about money, career, status, making sure that we are secure. And so we're going to be thinking about how we can be secure. And I suppose that the moon goes into Capricorn just after leaving the square to Neptune. So that may actually be the motivation behind our newfound materialism. We know it's an insecure world out there, and we need to put things back on a secure footing. And in the process, we might find that we're being a little bit selfish. So we have to be careful there. The thing about selfishness and putting our own interest first is that we all do it. But what we mustn't do is do it in such a way that we attract attention, that people can read what we're doing. We don't want to be transparent about our selfishness. We have to keep it under control and make a special effort to be humanitarian and to not only be thinking about ourselves, even if, deep down we're only thinking about ourselves. It's not just ourselves, I suppose. It's our own vital interests. It's the interests of our family, our loved ones. We put them first. We put other people second. And I suppose with the moon in Capricorn, you might say, well, charity begins at home. There are other things going on. The sun is now exactly semi-square Jupiter. We had that sun semi-square Jupiter starting yesterday. Now it's exact. And so with the sun semi-square Jupiter, there may be a certain tendency to exaggerate things. The sun is making a 45-degree aspect to Jupiter. And there are a number of ways in which that could manifest. We shouldn't forget that Jupiter can be quite moralistic. We often forget that, but Jupiter can be the judge. And so some of us might be quick to judge, quick to moralize, and do it in a way that is not entirely fortunate, and we have to ask whether it really is the right thing to do to moralize. There's always a good time to moralize, but there can be a bad time to moralize. So we must try not to be too judgmental. But in different hands, Sun semi-square Jupiter is going to work in different ways. And in other hands, Sun semi-square Jupiter may just be about exaggeration, people just taking things too far. It could be taking emotion too far. Sun in Cancer, quite an emotional placing. Sun in Cancer. Semi-square Jupiter in Gemini. Going too far with emotions. Perhaps being a bit contrived about emotions. Not being entirely natural about them, but sort of taking, just in general coming over as just being a bit weird in terms of how we express our feelings. And I suppose we also have to say Sun semi-square Jupiter can be about over-expenditure. Jupiter exaggerates what it touches, but I suppose it depends on the situation. We do have a couple of biquintile, quintile aspects. Mercury is biquintile Neptune. So that means Mercury and Neptune are around 144 degrees apart. That's 2/5 of the circle. So Mercury biquintile Neptune may be about trying to articulate something which is beyond us. So Mercury is articulation. It's trying to think logically about something. Neptune is that thing which is beyond us. And we're struggling to make a connection here. It can be difficult. And we may feel that we have to put in conscious effort to articulate something which, in some respects, can't be articulated. And then we've also got Mercury quintile Jupiter. So, this is a reminder that a day or two ago we had Jupiter quintile Neptune. That Jupiter quintile Neptune, it's breaking up a little, but it's still there. And so Mercury quintile Jupiter, wanting to get our message across. Mercury quintile Jupiter, loud and clear. So we have to make a special effort to raise our voice, to make sure we get attention. That's great, but we don't want to be seen to be exaggerating. So in our attempts to get our message across, we might come over as being a little bit clumsy and forced. So we do have to get that balance right. Now, there is another thing going on Jupiter. You'll notice that Jupiter is at 12 degrees 5 minutes Gemini. So there is something about that degree in terms of Jupiter and its strength. Now, we know that Jupiter is it's not fallen, it's in its detriment in Gemini, because Jupiter rules Sagittarius, so therefore it's in its detriment in Gemini. Now, the thing is that so far with Jupiter in Gemini, we haven't really felt it so badly. We haven't felt the downside of Jupiter. And that is because, in terms of face decanates, Jupiter rules the first 10 degrees of Gemini. So between 0 degrees and 10 degrees Gemini, Jupiter was in its own face, using sort of traditional astrology. So Jupiter had dignity, even though it was in Gemini. Then, when it got to 6 Gemini, it didn't just have face; it had term as well. So it moved into its own term. So it had double dignity by term and face, minor dignities, but you put it together, and we had quite a fortunate Jupiter. And then at 10 degrees Gemini, Jupiter lost some strength because it was no longer in its face. So it still had 2 degrees left where it was in its term. But now, at 12 degrees Gemini, this is the first time, while Jupiter is being in Gemini, that Jupiter has lost all dignity. It is, and we can now see Jupiter in its detriment, it perhaps in its pure form. And we can perhaps start to see the downside of Jupiter, which may not have been apparent so far. Sorry to be a bit of a downer on this, but I thought this did have to be pointed out. Now, it's not going to last for very long, because Mercury quite soon will move into Virgo. So Mercury moves into Virgo in about a week's time, and Mercury will stay in Virgo until the 15th of August. Then it actually goes retrograde back into Leo. But when Mercury goes into Virgo, I think that things will be a little bit easier, perhaps, because maybe Jupiter's rulership, Jupiter's ruler will perhaps be in its own sign, and that might make Jupiter a little bit easier, perhaps. But still, Jupiter will have no dignity. And so we have to get used to this concept of Jupiter perhaps working against us rather than in our favour. And so there may be less optimism now. maybe in terms of people's attitudes towards the economy and what's going on in society. Perhaps in a recent past, since the end of May, people have been able to see the bright side. But I think that bright side may start to dissipate now, and that might relate to the economy and people's attitudes to what's happening next. And Jupiter could be turning against us, but not in a major way. I don't want to exaggerate it, but it just is a reminder that Jupiter is in Gemini, and Jupiter doesn't really work very well in Gemini, and now it really is not going to work very well. But it's not really very personal, I don't think. I think it is more about the collective and society and people's attitudes to the economy, and whether we're in a period of economic growth or economic retraction. So I think that's all something that needs to be considered. Turning to the heliocentric picture, there's not a massive amount going on heliocentrically, but there's certainly enough to merit some kind of comment. So here's the heliocentric picture. Remember, this is from a perspective of the Sun. You put the Sun in the center of the solar system, and where it should be, of course. And there's Mercury opposition Uranus, and Venus is on the T. So actually, we have a T-square, heliocentric T-square. Mercury opposition Uranus with Venus on the T, because Venus is square Mercury and Venus is square Uranus. So with that T-square, people have a lot to say for themselves. Mercury opposition Uranus. We had Mercury opposition Uranus yesterday, but with Venus, there could be a sense that the things people say could encourage disharmony, could spoil the party. So, we're looking for harmony, we're looking for people to have a certain sense of togetherness, but that could be spoilt perhaps with Venus square Uranus, or perhaps just people talking too much. I mean, that's a negative way of looking at it. We could also say that Mercury is just simply on the Venus-Uranus midpoint. So that sees this configuration in a more positive way. Mercury on a Venus-Uranus midpoint is about how we communicate, and perhaps through our communications we can make big changes to our social environment. People might find us exciting, and they might want to get closer to us, although I suppose they could also find us a little bit disturbing, remembering that the Earth today is quincunx Venus. So with Earth quincunx Venus, aesthetics matter, taste matters, how we present ourselves matters. And so if we try to be too quirky in the way we present ourselves or the way we communicate, then we might put people off. So do bear that in mind. But just remember, it is a fairly collective energy, this heliocentric chart. It's not personal, and so it may be more about what is going on in society, people saying things without really thinking about it, people who are politicians saying things. Politicians have been saying a lot of things, and what politicians say can not necessarily make things better, it can actually make things worse. So that's the heliocentric position of the planets today. And now I want to look at today from the perspective of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for today for the 12 signs. And today is Friday, July the 19th, 2024. Aries. Well, just a reminder, Aries, that Mars is on the absolute brink now of leaving Taurus. Mars is now last degree of Taurus, and I think that should make you happy. You know, Mars is in its detriment in Taurus. Mars is a bit slow in Taurus, and things don't happen as fast as you'd like them to. And with Mars moving into Gemini, which I think happens over the weekend, you're going to get movement again. You're going to be able to be yourself more. I mean, you're already yourself. Things are already starting to move, but I think that Mars moving into Gemini could make a really big difference to you. And you know, when Mars moves into Gemini, it also makes trine to Pluto, and I think you can start looking forward to a time when you really do have a lot of power. Now, that's not to say that you don't have a certain amount of power today, and I do think that you actually benefit from the moon moving into Capricorn. The moon moving into Capricorn, Aries, it does put you in a position of authority. People are going to respect you. At least they can respect you, provided you handle yourself in the right way. You've got something to offer, and your advice needs to be carefully considered, because you have some useful things to say, and you can actually be quite sensible today. You know, I know that Arians can go off a handle and they can be very unsensible, but today, yeah, you are sensible, and you can come up with good advice, but don't have too many expectations at the moment. You know, you might feel that you want things to happen in terms of your status or your work, perhaps. You're expecting something to happen, you put the energy in, but in the first instance you just feel that nothing much is going on. You can't really expect actual tangible results today, especially at work. I mean, if you get tangible results, that's great, but I don't think you can expect them, because I just don't think that other people are really in the mood. And just remember, Mars is still moving through Taurus, the last degree of Taurus, and you yourself, you regard it as being important to make up your mind, but at the same time you're not really in a position to make up your mind, because Mars is in a process of transition. You are quite vulnerable here. I mean, not super vulnerable, but you know, we always hear about Scorpio and Scorpios being like snakes, changing their skin. But this might be a situation where where the sheep, the ram or whatever, is changing its fleece, if that's entirely possible, because you can change your skin, or you feel perhaps like you're changing your skin, because Mars is moving from one sign to another, and during that process of change, you are a little bit vulnerable because you haven't fully made up your mind. And just remember, we are most vulnerable when we haven't made up our mind, when we're not absolutely sure whether we're in one place or another place. You know, that's perhaps a point where we're vulnerable to other people's ideas, because if we haven't got an idea, then we're more likely to listen to other people's ideas, and those ideas might not necessarily be the right ideas. So yes, you are a decisive person. You give the impression of being decisive, but you're not going to get the response you hoped for. And at the same time, yes, you regard your being decisive as being important, but deep down you're still not quite sure. And so in terms of making serious decisions, maybe you should just hold on until Mars has changed sign. And of course, over the weekend, that's going to happen. Now, thinking about the weekend, and I know I'm not talking about the weekend here, but you wanted to know about Friday, you didn't want to know about the weekend. But still, if you got plans for the weekend, I would suggest that you make some effort over the weekend to do something useful and practical, where you are sort of laying the foundations for things. I think if you had a weekend of pure relaxation where you just did absolutely nothing, I think it would be a waste, because I think, Aries, there are things that you actually need to sort out. Now, not everyone's going to be happy about that. And as far as today is concerned, turning to the issue of relationships, because relationships are always important. I mean, some people, I suppose, they only look at astrology readings because they want to know about relationships. But I don't think that today is great as far as one-to-one relationships, particularly close emotional relationships. I think you're holding something back. And I don't think you're particularly vibrant emotionally. You're not a fully easy person to get on with. You are holding something back. And so I think it's going to be quite difficult to give your all to any one relationship. That shouldn't be a problem. You've got other things to be thinking about. You can't spend all your time on one person. And today, I just don't think you're in the right kind of mood for close interpersonal or romantic activity. I don't think that would fully work. But don't worry about it. There are other things going on which do need your attention. Taurus, you probably are going to benefit from the moon moving into Capricorn. Capricorn is an earth sign. And so with moon going into Capricorn, I think that your outlook is going to expand. You're not just going to be focused on one thing, or perhaps agonizing about your emotions, your emotional state. I think that you're going to be able to take a more expansive approach. And I know that the moon in Capricorn has certain reputation for being materialistic and selfish, as I was just explaining the introduction to the planetary picture today. But from a Taurean perspective, moon in Capricorn is perhaps not as selfish and self-focused as it is for other signs. You're trying to see the world in a new light, and you want to see more of this world. It's not a time for looking down, for focusing on yourself and your feelings to the exclusion of everything else. Instead, it's a time to be seeing, what the opportunities are. Now, that those opportunities might be spiritual and inspirational. They could actually be material as well. So, if you're an ambitious Taurus, then consider the possibility that the opportunities for expansion, growth, and self-improvement, even financial self-improvement, lie elsewhere, or at least they lie beyond your immediate environment. And so you might have to move a little bit beyond your comfort zone if you really want to be able to benefit from everything that is available today. Though you can't expect things to just happen immediately. And as I think I was saying for Taurus yesterday, you have to consider your capacity for changing things. So if you are in a situation that seems to be going nowhere, that isn't to your taste, that seems boring, people are talking about the wrong things, and you're feeling sidelined, then you actually have a scope here, Taurus, for making some kind of intervention that changes everything. It's all about perhaps pointing something out, or maybe doing something that no one is expecting. It just happens, and it's all about you, and it's all about you being an individual and not worrying too much about the expectations that are being placed upon you. And you may also be able to benefit from the fact that Venus, which is your ruler, is trine the North Node. And so with Venus trine the North Node, you may just get a sense today that just something has to be done. It starts at quite a private level. You start thinking about something, and you're thinking, you can see what's going on out there. And then you're thinking about yourself, and then your thoughts start to click into gear, and suddenly something becomes real, and you just realize what actually needs to be done and what you want to do. And it's not a time for making other people happy for the sake of it. You have to do what is right for you, and that might mean that you have to, I don't know, plough a lonely furrow. That's possible. Or it just might be that you just have to do things your way. It might be something very private. It might be very personal. But at the same time, if people want to follow you and they're interested in what you're doing, then that is certainly something that should be welcomed. And yeah, it goes back to that Venus trine the North Node. And the North Node can, of course, represent other people. It can represent contacts. And so with Venus trine the North Node, there is a possibility that today you meet some kindred spirits, people on your wavelength who understand your priorities, who give you the support you need. Gemini. Well, I should point out, by the way, that Mars is very close to entering your sign. I think over the weekend Mars goes into Gemini. It's not there yet, but I think you're beginning to feel it. You're beginning to feel that there is a new energy coming into your life. It's getting ready, and I suppose that means that you need to get ready. It's soon going to be a time when you're going to be in a position where you have to take action, and it's just going to be very important that you're able to take the right action. And yeah, I think that you're starting to feel it, but I don't think that right now there's a big hurry to really make things happen, especially with the moon in Capricorn, moon moving into Capricorn, and that does give a sense of Gemini's having a lot to think about. Feelings are strong. You understand, Gemini, that it is a complicated world, or at least you start to understand that it's a complicated world. Things might have been simple quite recently, but you're beginning to become aware that something you thought was pretty straightforward is actually not straightforward at all. Now, that shouldn't be a problem, provided you are quick to address the issue. And I think, Gemini, you are going to need to spend some time working it out. And I don't think that you need much help. Other people might be available to you, but do you really need their help? In many cases, you probably don't. And we also have Mercury, which is your ruler, making two biquintile-quintile aspects. So we've got Mercury biquintile Neptune and we've got Mercury quintile Jupiter. So Mercury biquintile Neptune is a little bit otherworldly. Now, I know that Geminis can overthink things, and by overthinking, they can sometimes destroy the magic. Sort of perhaps in a spiritual sense, I'm a Gemini. I can use my thoughts to just destroy everything. Can't believe anything. Nothing's out there. And it can be pretty miserable if my thoughts go into overdrive. I don't know about you. I don't want to be projecting. But with Mercury quintile Jupiter and quintile Neptune and biquintile Neptune, you are looking for more. You know that more is available, and your mind is actually very focused on this. How can the world in which you live be more meaningful? How can you find spiritual and inspirational satisfaction? And you're kind of working on it. You're trying to bring things together and create meaning. And it's perhaps something a little bit contrived, but don't worry about it being contrived. It's something you have to do. So you are working hard to make connections in your mind, and you want to, I suppose, redirect and redefine yourself in such a way that you can actually live out your inspirations and that they can become real. Because thoughts are just thoughts. Thoughts don't last forever, but we want those thoughts to be real. And I suppose for that to happen, you need willpower. And willpower is about concentrated energy, concentrating on something for a long period of time, or a relatively long period of time. That can be something that Geminis find difficult. Geminis do get distracted. They can get horribly distracted. They can go on tangents. And right now, it's not a time to be distracted. It's a time to be very focused on turning something that is quite, at the moment, internal into something external. And it's just about, perhaps, your dreams and your hopes. The Mercury quintile Jupiter may also have an impact on relationships. Mercury is your ruler. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, which is your opposite sign. So Jupiter could relate to the other person. So Mercury quintile Jupiter is about you making the effort to get on with another person. Maybe someone you're already in a relationship with. It may be someone you want to be in a relationship with. Maybe it's a person that you've recently fallen out with. And you realize that it's kind of down to you. You firstly have to decide that you want a particular relationship to work. You have to make that decision. And you perhaps have to have a certain vision about how you want this relationship to work. And then you're in a position to really start to make it happen. And that goes back to your creative will. It's you as the creator. That is what the quintile is about. And I think that it is actually possible for you today to create interpersonal harmony. Cancer. The moon is moving into Capricorn. And just before it moves into Capricorn, it makes a square to Neptune. So if you are a Cancerian who is perhaps in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, Philippines, whatever, you may be picking up more on that moon square Neptune than, say, for example, someone who lives in the Americas. So that moon square Neptune can be a time of confusion where you're not entirely sure what's happening, and it may be difficult to make up your mind and also difficult to work out what is actually happening. And so do take it easy. Don't feel that you have to make decisions, and those decisions may be about how you allocate your time, but may also be decisions about how you understand another person. Because as the moon makes a square to Neptune, you're understanding perhaps how particular people have an impact on your ambitions, and you perhaps have to make a choice, or you feel you have to make a choice, but in practice you probably don't have enough information in order in which to do that. So moon does move from Sagittarius to Capricorn, and certainly if you're in Europe, Africa, the Americas, then I think for most of the day we have got the moon in Capricorn. The moon is in your opposite sign. And so with the moon in Capricorn, well, we might say that you are in someone else's territory. I mean, not necessarily literally, but you're having to play things according to other people's rules, and or at the very least, you're in a frame of mind where you're able to accept that other people have their way of doing things, and you're prepared to fit in at some level. But then what? It would be nice if you were given a lead, if you were given some impression about what people wanted. If people could just show their hand. But I'm just thinking maybe not. I think it's like you're ready to compromise. You're ready to listen to what other people have got to say, but nothing is forthcoming. And that is because the moon is not really making any aspects in early Capricorn. It's not really going anywhere. And so you may find yourself in a position where you make an adjustment, and then you're wondering what is the point. So perhaps, Cancer, you should not make huge changes to your schedule or put too much effort into anything on the assumption that other people are going to be reliable. They may not be reliable, they may be late, they just may not be fully present for you. So perhaps, at least today, you don't actually have to make as much effort as you thought you did for other people. Yeah, sure, you have to be aware of them. You have to be aware that they can have an impact on you, but I don't think you need to be going out of your way to be with anyone, to change your schedule because of them. I really don't think that is necessary. So perhaps Cancer, it might be a day when actually not much is going on, when you actually have a considerable amount of freedom. But I don't think that you should just be twiddling your thumbs and toes. There are things to consider. Venus, for example, is making a rather nice trine to the North Node. And this is perhaps a reminder of what you're really supposed to be doing. You know, North Node is in Aries. North Node has been in Aries for some time, and it's not leaving Aries anytime soon. So, in the Cancerian chart, North Node in Aries, it's about getting noticed. It's about being an authority figure. You know, if you're not an authority figure, then at some level you perhaps should be an authority figure. You should expect to be taken seriously, and your authority does matter. It depends on what you're doing, at what level of authority. It might be your authority within the family. I don't know, I suppose if you're a politician, it could be your authority in terms of a whole country. It does depend. But your authority does matter, and at some level you are an authority figure. And with Venus trine the North Node, I think that it's a time when you can quite easily be an authority figure without getting any resistance, without anyone really questioning you. And you're helped by the fact that the moon in Capricorn is not making any aspects. No one's going to challenge you. No one's going to cause any trouble. Okay, they might sort of ignore you, but that doesn't matter. You are establishing your authority, and you're doing it in a way that doesn't attract criticism, maybe even doesn't attract attention. And this authority may actually have a financial element to it. So if you have ideas about money and the way money should be spent or not spent, it's a time when you can start to create a set of rules and procedures. Okay, they might be rules and procedures for you, but I think that if you've got any influence on other people, or if you're working perhaps on a company you're working for, your workmates, business, finances, if you have any influence, now is the time to use that influence, because I think it just will be relatively easy for you, Cancer, to make things happen your way. And your way is the right way, I think, at the moment, particularly when it comes to issues of authority, who's in control, where control lies. And I don't think you're going to be really seriously resisted. So perhaps in terms of leadership, you can just up the pace a little bit, and in the process I don't think there'll be much resistance. Leo, you are in a position where you are going to be listened to in a quiet way. I don't think that there is any need to make much of a fuss, but people, I think, will take you seriously. They will accept that you know what you're talking about, and this might actually be a feature of the way you are interacting with the world. You just come over as someone who is socially quite skillful, but at the same time is quite knowledgeable, and you understand what needs to be done. And so I think over the course of a day you're going to be respected without you actually having to do very much. Though I'm not saying that you should be lazy. I think that Leos are going to feel that there are a number of obligations that have to be carefully considered, but these obligations, you're not going to get any outside pressure. It's one of those moments where you know what has to be done, but no one is telling you that it has to be done. The only person telling you that it has to be done is you yourself. And so that means, Leo, that you can cover a lot of ground, but in your own way. It's just straightforward. There's no resistance, and in many respects other people will just get out of your way. But there's no need for conflict here. It's all very straightforward. But I have to point out that the Sun is making a semi-square to Jupiter. So the Sun is your ruler. I think I may have mentioned this yesterday, the fact that the Sun is making a semi-square to Jupiter. And I regard semi-squares as being an important aspect. 45 degrees. A semi-square is half a square. A square is 90 degrees. A semi-square is half of 90, which is 45 degrees. And with this semi-square, you may actually be quite motivated. While there is no pressure for you to do anything, at least from the outside, you're still going to have a sense in which you should be doing something. And you just need to make sure that you don't take things too far. There is some danger of that. So it's just important that you know your limits and that you don't allow yourself to be distracted, especially by things going on in your social life, worrying too much about what other people are up to. Other people are up to all sorts of things. You might feel that it's important to you, that you need to consider what other people are doing, that you might need to perhaps change your schedule because someone else is doing stuff that you don't understand, that you need to talk to them, you need to interact with them. If you're not there, who knows what might happen. But maybe you need to take a step back and just enjoy your own space and your own routines that you've created for yourself, and which don't need other people. So that's something perhaps that you need to consider. Also, if you do get heavily engaged with other people, you might actually start to lose control. You might find yourself under pressure, the kind of pressure that you hadn't fully bargained for, and you might be tempted to do things you didn't really want to do, that might be quite excessive, maybe spending money you didn't want to spend, or maybe even expending emotional energy. On your own, you're fine, but as you get more and more people around you, you have to respond. You have to keep responding, and so the emotional energy starts pouring out, and that really would be inappropriate. So I do think that you do need a certain amount of control today. It's your show, and it needs to stay that way. And this might be also quite a special time for Leos, because you're getting ready for something, and what you're getting ready for is the sun moving into Leo. The sun is now at 27 degrees 28 Cancer, noon New York time. So that means that it's got 2 or 3 days before the sun moves into Leo, before the sun is in your sign. Remember, sun is really strong in Leo. The sun rules Leo, but it's not quite in Leo yet. And so the next few days, perhaps over the weekend, it is a time for quiet preparation, getting ready to up the pace. But you're not there yet. And what you don't want is to have your preparations, this quiet time where you're trying to work out what you want to do, what you don't want to do. You don't want it wrecked by just other people getting in your way, putting demands on you that you don't really want to have to worry about. So in that sense, Leo, I think it's quite important that you have a good sense of your own boundaries. Virgo. Moon moving into Capricorn. Virgo, you are an earth sign, obviously. And so with the moon moving into Virgo, you feel that things are just a little more comprehensible. You understand them, and things are made clear, whereas in the past, really, they hadn't been particularly clear. And so you get a sense of what you can do. That's always important, about what is possible. And I think, Virgo, that perhaps your priority should be yourself and your talents. You are very talented, and you're able to really tune into these talents. And it's not just because Moon is moving into Capricorn. There are other things going on. whether it's in terms of perhaps an artistic talent, a business talent, some ability you've got that has maybe been dormant for a bit, but now things are starting to move, and you're actually getting an opportunity to utilize some of your talents. Every Virgo has got a talent that they don't, very often they've got something they don't talk about. They just don't discuss it. They don't think it's important. They keep it secret, and they don't think anyone cares. But actually they do care, and it can make a big difference. And perhaps this is a time when you can actually start to bring this talent out into the open. And I think you're going to be helped by the fact that the moon is moving into Capricorn. It's an earth sign. You can be very sensible about it. You're not going to have an unrealistic view about what can be achieved. You will be realistic, but not realistic to the point of being actually negative. You'll just know what needs to be done. And so I think that you really can benefit from the moon in Capricorn. And it's just kind of good that when the moon moves into Capricorn, it doesn't actually make any aspects immediately. And so because it's not making any aspects, you could say that there isn't so much pressure. You can just be yourself, and you can explore what you're good at, and perhaps even experiment a little. And you shouldn't feel that you have to do anything anyone else's way. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, and I'm not just talking about close relationships, your relationships across the board, I think there may be a little bit of disappointment, or maybe it's just realism. You might realize that certain people are not as clever and as not quite as with it as you thought they were. It's just suddenly becoming clear. Or you may have felt that certain people were being clever up until very, very recently. And now things have changed. And I think now things will start to change. You will maybe see that certain people are just paper tigers. They made a lot of claims. They seem to be strong, but actually you realize they're not strong at all, that in a way they've got nothing. That may not be a bad thing, because perhaps you'd always taken the view that people knew more than you. That was the way it was. But no, you are fast moving into a situation where you realize that you have the knowledge, perhaps you have the power as well, and that other people don't. And I suppose that gives you a certain amount of responsibility. You thought you could rely on someone else's cleverness, talent, knowledge, experience, and it's becoming clear that that's not the case. And so, that gives you a certain amount of responsibility. You're perhaps the one who knows the answers, and that just, I think, has to be accepted. And perhaps it's no bad thing. And it's just when you listen to people now, you listened to someone yesterday or the day before and it all seemed fine, and when you listen to someone again, like you listen to them today, and you close your eyes and you listen to what they're talking about, perhaps you're on the phone so they can't see that you're closing your eyes, and you close your eyes and you let the words wash over you, and you realize that actually they just don't know what they're talking about. It's disappointing, but it's also in a way quite empowering, isn't it? Libra, you don't have to be happy with the status quo. I know that some Librans, indeed many Librans, like things to be straightforward, especially in a social sense. But, sometimes you're just unhappy with the way things are going and you just feel that it's time for a change. And so how do you actually engineer a change? Well, by and large, there are two ways of engineering a change. At least today there are. One approach to creating change is simply to retreat. If you're not happy with the way things are going, that's all you have to do. You just have to walk away. You don't have to explain, you don't have to apologize, you just disappear. And that's fine. That is one approach, and I'm not saying it's the wrong approach. There is another way of doing things, and that is creating a new situation, a situation out of nothing. Things are going in a particular direction, people are comfortable, people are complacent, and then Libra is kind of working it out. Libra understands the balance, that complex balance which allows people to relate to each other in a particular way. And because you understand the balance, you understand what is required to upset the balance. And if you want to upset the balance, I think you can. And upsetting a balance is actually easy. It's about making an intervention. It's about just doing something that no one was expecting. It happens in an instant. It could be one word, one action, and everything changes. The focus is on you. And the focus is on you, okay, maybe for not very long, but in that time when the focus is on you, you have the stage, and because you have the stage, you have the chance to engineer, I think, quite a substantial change, and you can force people to do things your way. So it's up to you how you want to make an impact, or how you want to free yourself from a situation you find unsatisfactory. You either walk away from it or you change it. And both options are, I think, available to you. But when considering other people, it's tempting to think that nothing can change, that people are who they are. But actually, with or without your intervention, some people actually are in a process of change. And this is because Mars is ruler of Aries, which is your opposite sign, and Mars is changing sign. Mars is now in the last degree of Taurus, getting ready to move into Gemini. And so if you're concerned that someone is being very stubborn and being unreasonable and making everyone's life miserable perhaps, then don't necessarily jump to conclusions. Things may not be as bad as they seem on the surface, and outside events are happening, and someone may actually be about to change, almost like before your very eyes. So don't be too pessimistic when thinking about other people, and give them a chance. So maybe you should just wait, see what happens over the next few days. Wait for Mars to move into Gemini and see what kind of changes this brings. People's approach may be very different once Mars has moved into Gemini, and I think their approach they're going to become, I think, more flexible, more reasonable, less stubborn, or less fixed in their ways, and perhaps more open to new things, new ways of being. So in that sense, there is perhaps grounds for optimism. But going back to what I was talking about in terms of this option to be able to retreat from the world, it may actually be the right thing to do in the short term. I do think that over the next couple of days, Librans are going to value their own space. You know, there's a lot of things happening, a lot of distractions, a lot of pressures, and it may just be all getting a little bit too much. And as you move into the weekend, you may feel that, you know, it's time to put yourself first. And I don't think that anyone is really going to complain. I think that you will be respected, and disturbances and irritations can sort of drift into the background. Though still, there is stuff to think about, and I need to point out that the Earth is making a quincunx to Venus, and with this quincunx between the Earth and Venus, remember, this is a heliocentric aspect, not a geocentric aspect. So, you know, the Earth represents the world out there. It represents the world in which you're standing, and it's making a quincunx. And I think that some Librans may just have a certain lack of comfort with the material aspects of the world in which they live. It just doesn't seem quite right. And there may be a certain tendency on your part to just think, oh, well, that's simply the way it is, nothing you can do about it. But that's not the case. I think the quincunx is actually challenging you to make some changes to the world around you. And from a heliocentric point of view, it's not just the fact that the Earth is quincunx Venus. You know, Venus is making a square aspect to Uranus, a square aspect to Mercury. So even if you are withdrawing from the social world at least, and perhaps spending more time at home, you still feel a certain sense of dissatisfaction that things could be better. And it's because of these heliocentric aspects. And you would not be put in a state where you are feeling things could be better if you weren't able to improve the situation. I mean, there'd be no point in just making you feel dissatisfied for the sake of it. So any dissatisfaction you feel is there for a reason. And so if you're unsatisfied with your material world, which I think you might be over the next few days, then it is in your power to change things. And it goes back to what I was saying, that you actually do have the capacity to create sudden change. It's just that feeling, this is no good, I want to change it right now. If you feel like that, you can do it. You really can do it. And you can do it in such a way that you don't cause any damage, because I don't think anyone's going to resist you. There's going to be no real conflict. It comes from shock. The shock that Libra has opinions, Libra has a view, that Libra wants things done in a particular way. And so you do take advantage of that shock and use it to make things happen, and to make things happen your way. Scorpio. Scorpio, you're perhaps not right now in the most friendly and sociable mood. I don't think so. I think, Scorpio, that you feel a certain distance between yourself and other people. Maybe it's because you're aware of their limitations. Scorpio is a sensitive sign, and you've seen people behave. You've seen how people act. You've seen how people respond. And in some respects, it has been a bit disappointing. And there may be questions that you have regarding trust. It's perhaps occurring to you that some people just can't be trusted. So as a result of that, you're not really in the mood to get super close to any one particular person. And that's okay, I think. And also, why would you want to make commitments to anyone right now when you are in many respects in a process of change? Mars is now in, which is of course Mars is your ruler, Mars is in the last degree of Taurus. So Mars in the last degree of Taurus is getting ready to change into Gemini. So you should not be making commitments right now. And I've said this before. I think I've given you some warning over the last few days that Mars is in the last degrees of the sign. And now it really is in the last degrees of the sign. Over the weekend, Mars moves into Gemini. So it is a time, Scorpio, when you need the space in which to make this change. And when I was talking to Aries, I was because Mars rules Aries as well as Scorpio. When I was talking to Aries, I was sort of talking about the concept of changing skin, which is not really very appropriate for an Aries, but it's very appropriate for a Scorpio, because one of the symbols of a Scorpio is the snake, and snakes do change their skin every now and then. And of course, one of the keywords for Scorpio is transformation. So this may be a time of transformation, and part of the transformative process may be recognizing who can be trusted, and perhaps accepting that certain scenes have had their day. Maybe certain people you know them very well, but do you really want to go further? Probably not. Possibly, at least possibly not. So that does give us a sense here of this transformation, but I do think that this transformation is something very positive. I don't want to over dramatize it, but just the general way in which you are is changing. In the recent past, people might have had a big influence on you. You might have had to accommodate them, but not anymore. I think you're now moving into a time where I think you're going to be more independent, and I think that you need to respect your own needs, and certainly now is not a time to be making commitments. It would be the wrong time, because you simply don't have enough information in order to make commitments or to make decisions, because the facts are simply just not available. Now, turning to other people, I don't want to give the impression that you should completely ignore the social world. There are people out there who can be interesting, they can be exciting, and they can be dynamic. And I think you do want dynamic people right now. I think dynamic people are going to be good for you. You want people around you who are able to make quick decisions. And I think there's at least one person who is able to make a quick decision. Now, you don't have to follow through that quick decision. In fact, you shouldn't. You don't want to be totally reliant on what another person decides. But it's when someone is able to make a quick decision that you can be impressed by them, and you can then work out whether this person can be trusted. Not everyone can be trusted, of course. A lot of people can't be trusted, as you're now realizing. But the ability to be decisive is something you should be valuing, and it should be something you value in the people close to you. So once you've made the necessary changes, which I think perhaps are starting to happen over the next few days, and you're starting to reconfigure your social life. It's people who are clear and who are decisive who are going to win your trust. And decisiveness doesn't mean doing crazy things, having strange ideas. It's about knowing what needs to be done at a particular moment. And that's something you're going to really value. And that, well, I suppose especially apply if you're working. You want people who know what needs to be done right now, who indeed know how things need to be organized, because good organization matters to Scorpio, and you want to have people around you who are capable of good organization, who know where things should be placed. You don't want chaos. It's not a time when Scorpios really want to be in a sort of chaotic world, and so you want people who can make things more straightforward, can make things tidier, and better able to be understood. So overall, Scorpio, it's a bit of a transitional day when you kind of have to make a few. Well, you don't have to make any decisions, but you're starting to see people in a different way. You're starting to realize perhaps who is useful and who is not. And over the weekend, as Mars moves out of Taurus into Scorpio, I think you'll be able to intensify this process, and perhaps by the beginning of next week you will have started to make some fairly clear decisions about what you do want to do and what you don't want to do. Sagittarius, Jupiter is your ruler, and I have to point out that Jupiter's overall position is weakening a little. And Jupiter is in Gemini, and Jupiter is in its detriment in Gemini, and Jupiter is moving out of some of its minor dignities. In traditional astrology, we have something called the face and something called the term, and Jupiter used to be in its own face. It's no longer in its own face. Jupiter used to be in its own term, but it's now moving out of its term. So perhaps, Sagittarius, you need to accept that you're not quite in as strong a position as you used to be. Now, I'm not telling you that because I want to make you feel bad. I'm telling you that so that you can be better prepared. You might assume, for example, that you could do something, that it would be easy to do. And you might then realize that it's actually not easy to do at all. And you just might not have the strength that you had in the past. Now, there is a bit of a mitigation on this in the fact that Jupiter is in Gemini. Jupiter is a masculine planet. It's in a masculine sign, and Jupiter is a sign that works by that rules the hours of daylight. And so, if you're doing anything really important where you want to be as strong as possible, where you really want to maximize your strength, then try to do it in the hours of daylight. I think while Jupiter is in Gemini, while it's out of dignity, particularly while it's out of dignity, the hours of darkness should be avoided in terms of doing important things. Now, that does to an extent depend on where you are. So if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, right now, we've got long hours of daylight, so it's kind of okay. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, the days are shorter, so it does depend. But in general, try not to do things that are important at night, or try to, things that are really important at night, where you have to make clear decisions, where it's really critical. And by night I mean before dawn, after sunset. So getting up getting up super early doesn't mean you're avoiding the hours of night. If you get up too early, you're up before dawn and it's still night. So that's just something to think about, and it just means Sagittarius, that you just may need extra help, extra support, extra energy. Just don't overestimate yourself. Since the end of May, things may have been relatively easy, and right now, there is a change, and so you're going to have to put in more effort. You're going to have to be better prepared. You can't be complacent. Now, if you are able to understand this situation, it's all about working with the planets, it's about working with the planetary energies, and if you can do that, then I think you're going to be fine. And by the way, Venus is moving towards a sextile of Jupiter, and that's great. Now, that sextile between Venus and Jupiter happens in a few days' time. It's not quite there yet, but I think you're starting to feel that sextile between Venus and Jupiter. Venus is the lesser benefic, Jupiter is the greater benefic, and so Venus-Jupiter sextile is one of the best aspects in the book. And with that Venus-Jupiter sextile, there is opportunity coming your way, perhaps over the weekend. There may be a real opportunity to do something important, something special. Ideally, of course, remember, do it by the hours of daylight. And it may just completely elevate your worldview, and it may give you new opportunities to do things that you really want to do. And by the way, that Venus is, at the moment, Venus is trine the North Node, and so that helps even more. It is the right thing to do. So perhaps, Sagittarius, you should be thinking about what you're doing over the weekend, what your plans are for the weekend. I think it can be a good weekend in some respects, but you have to be properly prepared. With Venus sextile Jupiter, there is the possibility of laziness when you've got two benefics making an aspect to each other. So you don't want to fall into the trap of laziness. You don't want to fall into the trap of wasting an opportunity because you're too busy enjoying yourself on something that really doesn't have any consequence. So perhaps that's one thing you can be doing today, is preparing the weekend and just seeing how you can put yourself in an opportunity where you can make the most of everything that I think will become available to you very soon. Now, the moon, by the way, is leaving your sign. If you're in the Americas, Europe, Africa, the moon is out of Sagittarius. At least it will be out of Sagittarius by the late morning, depending on exactly where you are. So moon out of Sagittarius into Capricorn. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, the moon won't move out of Sagittarius until this evening. But with the moon moving into Capricorn, it just might be a time when Sagittarians can be realistic, perhaps focus to some extent on where their weaknesses are, but also shore things up. Perhaps things need to be shored up from a financial view. Moon in Capricorn, very financially orientated placement there. And I know that it's not nice to worry about money, and it's just a bit selfish and self-focused. Don't worry about that. You do have to think about yourself. And so timely action in terms of your finances today could actually be very useful. Capricorn, as I was just telling Sagittarius, the moon is changing sign. The moon is changing sign from Sagittarius into Capricorn. And moon moving into Capricorn is obviously good news, because the moon is moving into your sign. And with the moon moving into Capricorn, you have a sense that you understand what's going on, and from a material perspective, things are much easier. Things are clearer. Over the last couple of days, things might not have been at all clear, and you were trying to work out what was going on. But now, moon moving into Capricorn, things are starting to crystallize. Now, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, don't worry. The moon moves into Capricorn tomorrow, early tomorrow, I think. Sorry, the moon moves into Capricorn. Let's get that straight. This evening, in fact. But by tomorrow, you will, feel the full force of moon being in Capricorn. And what's nice about the moon being in Capricorn is that it's not really making any aspects in Capricorn. And the reason that's nice is because there isn't any pressure. You're here, you're in control, you've arrived, it's your world, but there's no obligation actually for you to do anything. And that's no reason to be lazy. You know what needs to be done, but I don't think that there's going to be many disturbances. It's kind of a world that you can create. So perhaps in terms of what's happening today is, you can create your own world and do things your own way. Though Capricorn, it does seem that you could have some rather unusual thoughts. You could be thinking about what could go wrong. Actually, Capricorns are quite good at doing that. That's what Capricorns do. Capricorns, they're the kind of people, they go into a building, they might go into an aeroplane, and they immediately think, how would I get out of this building? Or how would I get out of this plane if there were to be a fire or there were to be an accident? Capricorns think like that. And so you are aware of what can go wrong in any situation. And I think at the moment you seem to be also thinking about what can go wrong with other people. How could someone let you down? That's moon in Capricorn. Moon in Capricorn, very security focused. And moon in Capricorn doesn't make assumptions about people's good nature. And it's not just because of moon in Capricorn, it's because of other stuff going on. You're okay to be, if you want to be technical about it, Saturn is aspecting the Mercury Hades midpoint. Mercury is the planet of communication. Hades is about those dark ideas, perhaps criminality, lack of trust, just things going wrong. And that's what's happening from a Capricorn perspective. You are not trusting today, and you're having some really dark ideas about what could go wrong, and also about perhaps other people's personality flaws, what they're capable of doing if they were given the chance. So you're not really trusting today. I don't think you trust anyone. Maybe you trust yourself. That's what they say, isn't it? The one person you can trust is yourself. And that's certainly what a Capricorn thinks, isn't it? So that's the kind of day it is. It's just a day where you really have a considerable amount of control. I think you'll be able to anticipate other people's moves, particularly if those moves are negative, and not just other people's moves, but what's going on in society. If anyone can work out whether or not there's going to be a disaster, it's going to be you. So you're going to be well placed today, and it may be that you have some warnings to give people. You'll be very good at warning people if it's appropriate. People may listen to your warnings, they may not. That's up to them. But the point is that you will be able to do your bit. And if people don't want to listen to you, well, that's their problem, isn't it? Aquarius. Aquarius, you may feel that it's a time where you need to retreat a little. You're not really feeling especially sociable right now. And, it's because the moon is moving into Capricorn. Capricorn is the sign just before Aquarius. So sure, the moon will move into Aquarius in a few days' time. That will be a different picture. But right now, with the moon moving into Capricorn, you're just not feeling especially sociable. And one reason you might not be feeling particularly sociable is because you have your doubts. You don't think that anything is completely 100% reliable. You really don't. And you're aware of other people's flaws, other people's weak spots, and whatever action you're considering, or you might be considering, any action that you're perhaps being tempted to enact, you're still trying to consider, what actually could go wrong. So you have a rather cautious approach. And if that's the way you feel, then perhaps that's the way it should be. Though I do think that things are going to change. So what we have at the moment is we've got Mars in the last degree of Taurus. And over the weekend, Mars will move into Gemini. Now, I'll be talking about that when I do my forecast for the weekend. But with Mars where it is right now, in the last degree of Taurus, you just know that it's just not the right time to break cover. Perhaps, Aquarius, you've created a situation for yourself or an environment for yourself which is fairly secure, where you feel fairly protected. You know you can't stay here forever, but right now it seems the best place to be. And there might be temptations to move out of this little protected environment you've created for yourself. But right now, I don't think that you need to give in to those temptations. You know what's appropriate. But still, Mars will move from Taurus into Gemini. When Mars moves into Gemini, remember, Gemini is a air sign. Mars will be in a sign which is sympathetic to your own sign, which is Aquarius. And so when Mars moves into Aquarius, you can afford to be more optimistic and more positive, and start to really engage with your full potential. That's something to think about. But right now, I think there's actually no need to actually do anything. It's probably best overall, Aquarius. It's best overall, Aquarius, if you stay put, and if you're feeling that you're not in one place or the other, then find some cover, find somewhere you trust, sit it out, and in a few days' time you can reconsider the possibilities and perhaps be a little more decisive and also a little more adventurous. But right now, I don't think you have to be adventurous. It's probably the wrong thing to be doing. Pisces, the Sun is making a semi-square to Jupiter. And this semi-square to Jupiter, I think it does affect you because Jupiter's your ruler. And so with the Sun making a semi-square to Jupiter, you do have a strong sense that there is something you're supposed to be doing which you are not doing. And there is perhaps a bit of a tension here between your desire for security and your desire to create a safe environment for yourself, but also the desire to do something special, to do something important that is a fundamental part of your creative self. So with this Sun semi-square Jupiter, you're trying to work it through. And there is a certain temptation that you move from one pole to another today. You might feel, oh, you have to do something. You have to show the world how clever you are. But then you start doing that, and then you start thinking, oh, well, have you made yourself too vulnerable? Or if you're totally security conscious, then you're thinking, well, what am I missing? So you've sort of got to get the balance right. And the reality is that you can do something really special that is a key part of who you are without really taking any risks. Though there may be a certain inclination to try to work out what's happening out there, especially in your social life, if you have a social life. There is this bit of a social pull going on, and you might feel that you have to be seen and heard. That if there's an invitation, you may feel you have to accept the invitation. Okay, but if you are going to any social gathering today, it may seem the right thing to do. You may even think that there may be some advantage in doing it, some material advantage in mixing with certain people. But there may actually be a sense when you actually start to mix with people, you might realize that they're just not what you expected, that they just haven't got what it takes, and there may be a little bit of disappointment. Disappointment is actually a word I've been using every now and then when I've gone through the 12 signs. So disappointment could be a theme today if you spend too much time socializing. People promise a lot, but when it actually comes to it, are they able to deliver? And I don't think they are able to deliver. I don't think they're able to deliver in terms of your expectations of them, because I think that some of your expectations are actually quite material. You may not be admitting it, but I think they are. I don't think they're going to be able to deliver in that department. But I also don't think they're going to be able to deliver in terms of providing interest and excitement. Isn't that why we socialize very often? We want to hear something interesting. We perhaps want to gossip, we perhaps want to be excited, and I don't think we're going to get either. So in the social department, don't allow yourself to be pressurized. But if you do find yourself in a situation where there are people around you, then you actually can have quite a significant impact. You're able to make it absolutely clear what is right and what is wrong, with no with no room for argument, with no ambiguity. Your position will be clear, and I think your authority will be clear. Of course, you've got to make a little bit of an effort. So if something's not to your liking, and you feel something needs to be said, you will be able to say it, and I think that you will be respected. And this is perhaps another example of Saturn being in Pisces. You know, Saturn's being in Pisces, what's it, since March 2023. So with Saturn moving through your sign, you know, this is about authority, about you becoming a person of authority, of someone who needs to be taken seriously. And perhaps we'll see another example of it today. And don't be ashamed of being a bit of a downer on things. If something needs to be said, if you want to put people to rights, then yeah, now is the time when that is something that you certainly can do. But there are other things going on. You know, you can try to be serious, you can try to be the adult in the room, but you have some interesting ideas. Some of your ideas are very speculative, and possibly if you were to pursue your ideas in their raw form, it might be a recipe for disaster, but they're interesting. And perhaps some of these ideas, that things going through your head that you haven't communicated yet, and even if you have communicated, it's all in a very vague and confusing way, but still some of those ideas are worth holding on to. You know, it may just be that what's happening, Pisces, is that you're picking up on what's going on in the world, what's happening in the world, where the world is moving, and these ideas are starting to form. They're not quite ready to be acted on, but if you do some work on them and you are, you know, very serious about it, then these ideas might be the start of something very important and very useful. So don't completely ignore and discount your ideas, even if they seem like fantasy, because with a bit of work, maybe fantasy can be turned into reality. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and I now want to look at today with the help of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was number 17, following. So there is this ambiguity about this hexagram. Is it us following someone else, or is it someone else following us? And it may be a question when we need to think about who we are following ourselves. If we're part of a hierarchy, which person are we following? Which person are we devoted to? Of course, the I Ching, from a Confucian perspective, is looking at a hierarchical society, I suppose, with the Chinese emperor at the top. And there's always going to be someone above us. And it's perhaps saying that we need to consider our position in the hierarchy, and that if we want to benefit, then we have to be prepared to follow, and we have to be able to understand the timing. We have to get the timing right, and we have to be able to fit in with the expectations that are all around us. And there's even the possibility that we can do something to impress a superior, perhaps in terms of work. It could be one's boss, or I suppose in a family situation, who's in charge of the family, whoever that might be. Remember, standard Confucian way of looking at things. So how can we impress? Maybe we can solve a problem that has not been solved, or get hold of something that people have been looking for, and that will get us extra credibility. So that is one way of looking at it. But on the other hand, it might be about other people following us. I suppose in the Western world, with this focus on individuality, it's all about being the leader, isn't it? Put great emphasis on leadership. That's what it's all about. That's all you hear about, isn't it? With these American schools, generations of leaders, and can everyone be a leader? I don't know. That seems to be impossible. And then you've actually got degrees, in educational leadership. It seems that as the American education system declines, you get more and more people having degrees and doctorates in educational leadership. That's kind of weird, isn't it? But still, we can sometimes regard ourselves as being a leader. There's nothing wrong with leadership if it is appropriate. And the question is then, how do we become a leader? What is the right way to be a leader? And I think the I Ching is telling us that if we want to be a leader, we need to be a follower first. Following and leading are perhaps part of the same thing. So perhaps this dichotomy between leadership and following it may be a false dichotomy. Because if we are unable to adapt, then we're not going to be able to lead. If we're unable to listen, we're not going to be able to lead. If we're unable to follow, we're not going to be able to lead. So it's all part of the same thing. And it does seem that, if we can adapt, then I think that we can be in a position where people are going to respect us and are going to be prepared to follow our lead. And we have a moving line. We have the fifth line moving here. And that fifth line is fortunate. Usually in the I Ching, the fifth line is fortunate. And so that fifth line is allowing us to attract a following through our own behavior, through our own correct behavior. And perhaps what we have to do is concentrate on the good in ourselves and perhaps in other people. So I suppose we have to be examples. That means emphasizing what is good in ourselves and de-emphasizing the stuff that is not so good. And at the same time, when interacting with other people, we should, encouraging them to make the most of what they've got, to really emphasize their good points and de-emphasize their bad points. But the fifth line moving does suggest that this can be done. And then I think that we can consider the next move. What is the next move? What happens when we have created a situation where we get the balance right between following and leading? Perhaps by following, we've able to put ourselves in a position of leadership. What happens then? So then we get the fifth line moving. And this moves to hexagram number 51, which is thunderbolts. Very different hexagram. Now the Wilhelm translation calls it the arousing. I don't know, I think thunderbolts is a better translation, which is what Greg Winkup uses. So with this hexagram number 51, thunderbolts, having got ourselves into a position of some leadership, then things change. And things just change out of the blue, unexpectedly, thunderbolts. We're not prepared. And our first impression might be that all our efforts are for nothing. It's all wasted because something's happened that seems on the surface to be completely disastrous. It changes all our plans. Everything has to change. But the I Ching makes it very clear that it's not a problem. The Wilhelm I Ching the Wilhelm translation talks about the sacrificial spoon when you're, I suppose, putting incense onto a fire or whatever, doesn't spill anything. So there might be an earthquake, there might be thunder, but still we don't drop it. And even if, our city is captured by the enemy, some enemy army moves in, remember I'm talking about this in a symbolic way, we're still able to continue with our rituals, with our traditions. So however dramatic things are, externally, nothing changes. So things just carry on before. Maybe the scenery has changed, but so it's just very important we don't overreact. So it just may be that by making some changes in the power structure, going back to the previous hexagram of following, by making some effort to establish ourselves in the hierarchy, to perhaps get the right relationship perhaps between people who are below us and people who are above us, by making a few changes, we may be attracting something else that seems dramatic, that may even be seen to be catastrophic, but it's not actually catastrophic at all, because actually we can just carry on as normal. And now I want to talk about Black Moon Lilith. And I don't know if I pronounced Lilith correctly. I said I don't use Black Moon Lilith in my astrology. And so, in a way, this part of the video is really for my benefit. I'm just trying to work it through, and I'm trying to do it like from first principles. I know that Lilith is about the night. It's supposedly a feminine force, and I suppose Lilith is represents a point of apogee. It's that point when the moon is furthest away from the earth. Every time in its cycle there is that point, and so that means that when the Earth and Lilith are, when the Moon and Lilith are conjunct, that means by definition that the Moon is furthest away from the Earth. So so when you see that conjunction, that's what it means. So here, for example, here's the lunar apogee for July the 12th, 2024, 9:12 a.m. I set this for London. So by definition, you can see Lilith. This is a true Lilith, and the mean Lilith can be completely different from true Lilith. Okay, not completely different, but it can be in a different sign. It can be a long way apart. True Lilith compared to mean Lilith. So when you look at Lilith in terms of however you're calculating Lilith, it may be different from how I'm calculating it. Because true Lilith and the mean Lilith, and I think there may even be a third way of calculating Lilith, and maybe three different ways, maybe more of calculating the position of Lilith. But I just wanted to start with one way, and I'm going to the true Lilith. So here we have an exact Moon Lilith conjunction, and because that is the point where the Moon is furthest away from the Earth, and perhaps that is giving us a different side to the Moon. That's perhaps why it's called Black Moon Lilith. Perhaps the dark side of the feminine, or perhaps it's the powerful side of the feminine. People talk about Adam's Adam's wife Lilith, who wouldn't bow down to him. I think that's how the legend goes. So it might be about feminine power. So that is one possibility. But it's also about the night. And I was thinking about the night and Lilith a few days ago when I was considering the horoscope of John Kennedy Jr. Now, John Kennedy Jr., there's John Kennedy Jr.'s chart. Remember, he was the one who died in the plane accident on July the 16th, 1999, so 25 years ago. And I don't think there's anything particularly spectacular about his Lilith in his natal chart. There is his Lilith, remember, true Lilith, was at 22 degrees 35 Gemini, so not so spectacular, really. But then I was looking at other charts, and I was considering the chart for his crash. So in terms of why he had his accident, I think, is that he had a plane, he had a pilot's license, but he was not a professional pilot. I heard someone said that you should never be flown by a plane by someone who isn't a professional pilot, who isn't a pilot as a living. That's a dangerous thing. So clearly, John F. Kennedy Jr. was overestimating his abilities, and perhaps his abilities in terms of night flying and how to deal with the instrumentation. So it was the night that killed him, you could say. And here is the chart for so in terms of the actual crash chart, so looking at the crash chart, this is when the plane went down. I know it says Martha's Vineyard, but I did change the coordinates because the program gave me Martha's Vineyard's coordinate, but then I changed the coordinates slightly to take into account of the fact that he crashed well out to sea. And the crash chart, I thought that was interesting. We had Pluto on the midheaven, because we had midheaven at 10 degrees 20 Sagittarius at the time of the crash, if I've got this time right. So you can see that Pluto was on the midheaven. But also, Black Moon Lilith, true Black Moon Lilith, is on the midheaven. Okay, so that was the first thing. And I thought, well, that was quite interesting. Then the question is, how does that impact Kennedy's chart? So here is the chart here's Kennedy's chart in the middle, and there is the positions of the planets when he had the accident. And you can see that Kennedy had his IC at 9 degrees 18 Sagittarius. Now the IC is opposition to midheaven by definition. The IC, I suppose, you're up there in the plane and then you crash to the sea, down into the sea, and that's it. You go from the top to the bottom. And his IC is at 9 degrees 18 Sagittarius. Mean Black Moon Lilith was at 9:19 Sagittarius. It was within 1 arc minute of his midheaven, of his IC. And of course it was conjunct Pluto. So this is the night, the demons of the night dragging him down. So, and I just found this interesting, that in his case, Lilith really did seem to be kind of working. And then I wanted to look at his solar return for 1998. So this was the solar return before the crash, and here is his solar return for the crash. And yeah, Sun is kind of conjunct Pluto, but look at Lilith. Black Moon Lilith is conjunct his Sun. So I'm not saying that Black Moon Lilith was particularly powerfully configured at the time he was born, but certainly at the time of his death, Black Moon Lilith was all over the place. And so we get this idea that something bad is happening at night. And I did find that concept really interesting. And talking about the night, if you think about December the 7th, 1941. Now, December the 7th, 1941, we think of Pearl Harbor, don't we? And this was an accident. This was a crash. This was an attack on America that happened in broad daylight. That's how we perceive of Pearl Harbor. But so here's the chart of Pearl Harbor. This is obviously when the Japanese attacked the United States fleet in Hawaii, and of course it was the day of infamy. So you could say, well, it's not surprising, is it? Look at Lilith. I suppose Lilith is something you could say that there's something unexpected about Lilith causing destruction, but I don't know. I'm not entirely convinced by that, even though this works really well, because you've got an exact Sun opposition Lilith at the time of the Pearl Harbor attack, and Lilith is conjunct Jupiter, and Lilith is it's not really opposition Mercury, but so Sun-Jupiter opposition, quite close to the United States' descendant, so that sort of fits. But on December the 7th, we had Pearl Harbor, but it was not the only thing happening on December the 7th. Hitler made a decree on December the 7th. And Hitler's decree was called the Nacht und Nebel, forgive my pronunciation, decree. And I don't know any German, but Nacht und Nebel in English means night and fog. And what this decree did, it was actually passed on December the 12th, but the December the 7th was when actually, the same day as Pearl Harbor, Hitler made this decree. And what it meant was that it allowed the Nazis, the Germans in occupied Europe, to just arrest people by night without announcing what they were doing, just taking people away, arresting them, sending them to concentration camps, sending them to their death. And they were particularly focusing on people who were involved in the resistance, but night and fog. So here you perhaps see the real meaning of Lilith. That is a very Lilith thing. Taken away at night to your death or to a concentration camp. And so there you have it happened. There's the Sun, but opposite. I know this is set for Pearl Harbor, but imagine, I don't know the time he made the decree, so it might as well be set for Germany, whatever. The Sun was opposition Lilith when that decree happened. And so that might give this indication of things being taken away, things happening at night, really bad things happening at night. So that might just be a way that Lilith was happening. And I suppose something happening in the 1930s when you're looking at children being kidnapped. I suppose the most famous child being kidnapped is the Lindbergh kidnapping. And I thought I would just have a look at the kidnapping of the chart of Charles, what's his name? Charles Lindbergh. Remember, he was the son of Lindbergh, the guy who flew across the Atlantic, and the spirit of St. Louis, and his son Charles Lindbergh was kidnapped and murdered. I think no one's quite sure what happened, but there we have his moon. Charles Lindbergh had the moon on the 8th house cusp, so the 8th house connected with death and making the conjunction to Mars. But there's Lilith at 10:08 Aquarius. So Charles Lindbergh had the moon exactly square Lilith, and the moon represents perhaps early childhood, and so in his childhood, moon square Lilith, he was kidnapped and taken away, stolen away. That's a Lilith thing, and he was killed. Now, it was not a woman who did this, I don't think. It was, I forget his name, the guy, he was executed, went to the electric chair for it. But that gives us an idea, perhaps, about how Lindbergh was working. So then I was thinking, well, how Lilith was working. Yeah. So then I'm thinking, well, if Lilith really works, then you would expect Lilith to be highly configured in the charts of monstrous women, women who are notorious monsters. Now, if from a British perspective, obviously I'm in America, but I'm probably more familiar with the UK from the United States. One woman who is held up as being a total monster is Myra Hindley. So in the mid-60s, Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, her boyfriend Ian Brady, they kidnapped and murdered. They murdered children, and I don't know. They not very young children, but I don't know how old her victims were off the top of my head. I don't know. They were the sort of, I think they were sort of 10, 11. I mean, I don't know quite what the precise age of the children were, but they were kidnapped and they were killed in horrific ways, and they were buried on the moors, because this was, and so this idea, Myra Hindley, in a sense, got more attention, even though Ian Brady, her boyfriend, was the real, if you like, brains behind it. It was his. If she'd never met him, she wouldn't have, I'm sure she would never have committed these murders. But somehow, I suppose because she's a woman and she's doing these murders and doing something which is the anti-mother, isn't it? In fact, Ian Brady used her because, you know, she would have a sort of, be a figure who a child might trust. And so that sort of motherliness was sort of perhaps abused. And so you would have expected Myra Hindley to have a strong Lilith, wouldn't you? I mean, that would make sense. I'm not saying she does have a strong Lilith, by the way. I'm just saying, you know, this is how my logic was going. So here is, let's find... so Myra Hindley, fortunately, we do have a horoscope for Myra Hindley. We have a time of birth for Myra Hindley. So this is Myra Hindley's chart. And so she was born on July the 23rd, 1942. And on the face of it, her Lilith is not particularly exciting. It's at 19 Cancer. By the way, the concept of the destroying mother, the mother who doesn't nurture, the mother who murders, you know, she's a Cancerian. She's got her son right at the end of Cancer. I mean, I know that some people say that the final degrees of the sign can be very unfortunate, and so I suppose that she perhaps shows this. But her Lilith is, you know, it's not on the face of it particularly highly configured. Okay, she's got Lilith in Cancer, and I suppose you could read that something into that. She's got Lilith on the Sun-Jupiter midpoint. So Lilith is potential. Sun-Jupiter, I suppose, is who she becomes, how she becomes famous or infamous. But she's got Lilith on the Sun-Jupiter midpoint. Now, that in itself is not a big deal, because we've got to be very careful when you're dealing with a planet like Lilith, or a point like Lilith, because, you know, you can just read anything into anything. You just look at it, and you can always find something that connects. So I would have thought that Lilith on its own doesn't tell us much. It's disappointing. It's unimpressive. But how about when we compare her chart with the chart of Ian Brady? Ian Brady was her boyfriend the guy who inspired all this. And here is Ian Brady's chart. And that's Myra Hindley in the middle, and there is Ian Brady on the outer wheel. So there's Ian Brady's Pluto, 29 degrees, 23 Cancer, right on her sun. So I suppose you could say he really messed with her. You can imagine the influence that Pluto would have on his sun. But then there's his moon, which I thought was really interesting. His moon, we do have a time of birth for him because Ian Brady was born in Glasgow in Scotland. Scottish times, Scottish birth certificates have a time on them. We do know. For some reason, we've got Myra Hindley's time. I don't know how that happened, but we know when Myra Hindley was born, and we know when Ian Brady was born, and his moon was at 1932 Capricorn, and so his moon was opposition her Lilith. And I'm just thinking that moon in Capricorn on her was actually activating her Lilith. And I just think that was quite an interesting piece of synastry between Ian Brady and Lilith. That Lilith on the Sun-Jupiter midpoint for Myra Hindley in Cancer was potential. Yeah, it was a potential for this night demon to be released. Although I don't think the murders happened at night. But it was a potential for this demon to be released. But it didn't fully get released until she met Ian Brady. And Ian Brady was able to bring it into being. So I kept thinking about horrible women who are just, I don't know, disgusting human beings. Who is particularly in a motherly sense, horrible mothers? Who is the most horrible mother of the 20th century? Well, a candidate for being the most horrible mother of the 20th century would, of course, would be Magda. Would be Magda Goebbels. I've looked at Magda Goebbels' chart before. So Magda Goebbels, she was the wife of Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, and as the Soviets came in and they started to surround Berlin, she had an opportunity to leave, and she had loads of children. She had loads. I think she had 4. She had 4 children with her, maybe 5. I think she had a 5th one who was older from a previous marriage, but I think she had 4 children or something like that. She had loads of children with Joseph, and she had the option to take her family out of Berlin, but she didn't want to do that. I suppose maybe that's a Scorpio thing. She just wanted to go down with the whole thing. So on May the 1st, after Hitler committed suicide, she killed all her children. She poisoned them all. With cyanide, and so that is an extraordinary thing to do. She didn't even have to do it. She could have got her family out. Okay, she could say she was afraid of what would have happened when the Soviets came, but still, this is a fairly horrific thing to do, even by the standards of the Second World War. But that someone could do this to their own family, their own children, and so she had Sun conjunct Lilith. There's her Lilith at 1844 Scorpio, and the Sun at 1755 Scorpio. And yeah, she was a Scorpio. That's a kind of Scorpio at its very worst, isn't it? The lowest level of Scorpio is the Scorpion, you stinging itself to death. I mean, I'm sure that doesn't really happen in practice. And so then look at her Venus. Her Venus is at 3 degrees 35 Capricorn. So she has got Venus exactly semi-square her Lilith, and the Sun conjunct her Lilith. So I think we've got a sort of a warning here that Lilith is quite strongly configured. And this murder, it happened at night. These children, they got dressed, they went. They were wearing whatever their dressing gowns. They went to bed, and then they were all killed. And I mean, this. I think it happened at night. I think that the timing of it was, and that's kind of what you'd expect. So this is roughly, it happened. I think I tried to work out what time it would happen. Roughly 9 p.m. May the 1st. That was the day after Hitler. The day after Hitler committed suicide. And I'm not saying Lilith in itself is particularly important here, but I mean in terms of its position. But there's Lilith in Scorpio at the time of this. But of course, there were so many other bad things happening in the world. So why should this be focused on Magda Goebbels' family? So Helga, this is a chart for Helga's. And the reason I've gone for Helga Goebbels, Helga was the oldest of the children. And Helga seems to have been the one that really was aware of what was going on. She was the one, but when they forced cyanide into her mouth, or they first gave them morphine and then cyanide, she was the one that resisted. So I think it's Helga's chart, and she couldn't stand her mother, apparently. She was her sort of daddy's girl. Her daddy was Joseph Goebbels, but she couldn't stand her mother. And so here is Helga Goebbels' chart. And Helga had her Lilith at 2243 Aries and Uranus at 22. So she had a Lilith-Uranus conjunction. And this Lilith-Uranus conjunction, it sort of links with a load of other things going on in the chart. It's square Pluto. So she's born September the 1st, 1932. So she has Lilith conjunct Uranus, and it is square Pluto. So she was born at the time of a Uranus-Pluto square. Her Lilith was connected with that, and so we've got that. So I think there is a certain strength there because her Lilith is connected with those two planets, and at the same time, look at the Neptune. Neptune is at 7 degrees. So can you see that Neptune is making the exact sesquiquadrate to Uranus? Neptune is also making a semi-square to Pluto, and they're all having an impact on Lilith. And then her Lilith itself, and those are outer planets, and so her Lilith itself is square her midheaven. Her midheaven, assuming we've got a time right, German times are usually quite good. And so we've got Lilith at, her midheaven is at 22 Capricorn. So that means that her Lilith is square the midheaven. And of course the midheaven is the mother. And so you perhaps get an idea there of the destroying mother. And then if you're into quincunxes, I think only use quincunxes if they're close, but her moon was at 22 degrees Virgo, and so that moon is, it's quincunx, exactly quincunx her Lilith. So I think this is a good example of how Lilith is working. And if those, we can go back to, another child, a much younger child, was Charles Lindbergh, who was kidnapped and murdered. But in Charles Lindbergh's chart, we had moon square Lilith. Here we have moon quincunx Lilith, but also that moon is square her midheaven, assuming we've got the time of birth correct. Also, you've got Mars not too far off the square of Lilith. So I think that gives support to this idea that Lilith can be about the dark mother and having a dark mother. And also we get this idea of bad things happening at night. Bad things happening at night. I also wondered whether Prince Harry would have anything in terms of Lilith. I mean, it's always possible. I suppose his mother died at night, maybe. So I thought I'd have a quick look at Harry's chart. I mean, it's nothing particularly spectacular, but the only thing I would point out with Harry is that Harry's Lilith is at 12 degrees 49 Aries, which is exactly square his ascendant. So it would be on the fourth house cusp using the equal house system, although the fourth house is more about the father. But still, having Lilith at the bottom of the chart perhaps represents his roots, and something at the bottom of who he is. Something is stolen, and that's Lilith perhaps taking his mother away. But maybe I'm just reading too much into it. I suppose at that stage you might then be interested in Princess Diana, and whether, I mean, you could say that she was in some respects stolen from the world. I suppose if you're a fan of Princess Diana, nothing especially dramatic, but she has Lilith fairly close to the 8th house cusp and opposition Saturn. It's not exactly close. It's not too close. I'm not saying that is especially impressive, but I mean, at least there's something involving Lilith. So that's maybe interesting, but I would have preferred it to be kind of a bit more interesting. Now, again, other things happening at night. So other things happening at night. This is something that happened at night. This is something that happened at 2:25 a.m. on June the 29th, 1967 in Rigga in Louisiana. And this is an event. And so here's the event. We've got Mars opposition Black Moon Lilith, and it's quite a strong opposition, quite a close opposition, and it's square Mercury, and it's sort of quite close to the IC, but that's quite a powerful T-square, isn't it? At that event. So that was, of course, the death of Jayne Mansfield. So I thought that Jayne Mansfield might be, I mean, it was a very high-profile death. I think that she literally got decapitated in the death, and decapitated in the accident. And so she was a sort of sex symbol, sort of kind of on the level of Marilyn Monroe almost. Not quite. No one can be quite on the level of Marilyn Monroe. And I think she was in her early mid-30s when it happened. So that kind of fits. Someone who was a sort of Hollywood star, someone high profile, but events just there's a connection between. There's Jayne Mansfield, and I'm not, by the way, saying anything amazing is going to happen, but there is Jayne Mansfield's horoscope in the middle, and that's the chart of her death on the outside. And I don't think that, there you have Lilith was at 2119 Aries at the time of her death, and Jayne Mansfield had her Pluto at 2117. So she had Lilith exactly square her Pluto, and in fact there was there was a Lilith Mercury square, and of course Mars was involved here. But we had this T square, so this T square was exactly hitting Jayne Mansfield's natal Pluto. Now, normally I wouldn't be too worried about natal Pluto being transited, but maybe because she was a star. If you're a star, if you're a famous person, your Pluto does become more important because you kind of become more part of a collective. And maybe this particular representative of the collective was changing, and she was surplus to requirement. So perhaps this was a time when she had to go. Now, in the 60s, another event where you really would have perhaps expected Black Moon Lilith to have shown up would have been the murder of Sharon Tate. Again, this happened at night, didn't it? And in the 60s, so here's Sharon Tate's natal chart. She had her Lilith at 0 degrees Leo. I don't think it's particularly exact here. It's in her first house, but I wouldn't be especially impressed by that Lilith. Not particularly, but still, I would expect something. If Black Moon Lilith is as bad as it sounds, so I was kind of looking for something, but I didn't quite find what I was looking for. But then I was thinking, well, okay, who was responsible for her death? Well, it was one of Charles Manson's disciples, wasn't it? I mean, Charles Manson wasn't personally wasn't directly responsible, but he ordered the event which led to it. So effectively, Charles Manson had a big responsibility there. So what about Charles Manson's horoscope? So here's Charles Manson's chart. Charles Manson had Pluto conjunct Lilith in his chart. I know he's a man and Lilith is a female energy, but I suppose you might think, well, you'd expect something there, and so there's his Lilith. Lilith sort of on the Pluto node midpoint. Pluto node is a tragedy of a large group of people, so he's perhaps aware of the tragedy all around him, and that's maybe him. But what about the link between Charles Manson and Sharon Tate? And here is the synastry. And what's interesting about the Charles Manson and Sharon Tate is they had Lilith synastry. So there is Sharon Tate's Lilith at 0 degrees 43 Leo, and Charles Manson's Lilith was at 2920 Cancer. So they were within, less than 1.5 degrees apart. So Charles Manson and Sharon Tate, they shared their Lilith, the same within a couple of degrees apart, which I think is of interest. And turning to the actual moment of Sharon Tate's death, or when she died, we don't know precisely when she died. She died when Lilith and the moon were in conjunction. So that means that Sharon Tate, this sort of fairly iconic figure, died when there was a moon-Lilith conjunction. So that means that she died when the moon was very close to its apogee, when the moon was furthest from the Earth, because that's what it's about, isn't it? That's what Lilith is focused on, the apogee point, when the moon is furthest from the Earth. And final chart is, final iconic figure is Marilyn Monroe. And Marilyn Monroe has Lilith exactly rising, true Lilith, exactly on her ascendant. So you can read all sorts of things into this. I mean, maybe this is the true nature of Lilith, the positive nature of Lilith, that she was perhaps able to be an individual, to be a trendsetter. She was able to really be a powerful figure, and maybe she was able to bring down some of the power of this energy, Lilith, someone who kind of did things her way. So that is perhaps quite a fortunate way in which Lilith is working, but it must perhaps have made her vulnerable. having Lilith on the ascendant, maybe she was always courting death. And so perhaps it would not be surprising, you know, if Lilith was in some way involved in her death. And so we don't know precisely when she died. And of course, she died at night. That's what Lilith does, takes people away at night. And so here, finally, is the rough horoscope of when she died. And I make it August the 4th, 9:30 p.m. I mean, there's some controversy about when exactly she died. And what do we see? We see, as with Sharon Tate died on a Moon Lilith conjunction. Marilyn Monroe also died on the Moon Lilith conjunction, i.e. she died when the moon was apogee, at its furthest point from the Earth. And I suppose perhaps with Marilyn Monroe and Sharon Tate, I said particularly Marilyn Monroe because she was such an icon, the moon, something is being taken away. The moon is at its furthest point from the Earth. Okay, those are a few thoughts on Lilith. As I said, I'm not claiming to be an expert on Lilith, and I was just trying to do it in a sort of an empirical sense, looking at the evidence, getting some idea about what Lilith might all be about. It's only the beginning. I'll be looking more at Lilith. I'll be giving Lilith some more thought, but at the moment, I'm not using it in my horoscopes. I mean, I'll be looking at it in horoscopes that I use perhaps on this channel, but I think in a professional sense, I'm not convinced by Lilith. I'm not quite sure how useful it is at the moment. I mean, I can change my mind, but I'm just working on it. So that's where I am with Lilith. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found it of some interest. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, of course, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.